r/ask Reddit. When interviewing for a job, what are questions you should be sure to ask your interviewer? There's usually somebody on the interview committee that has been at the company for a decade or more. I am always sure to ask them what made you stay so long and continue to stay with the institution. Lots of times they are puzzled and it looks like they are questioning it themselves. Professional development and education opportunities. To show you're invested in the role and career pathway. I left a job with an extremely toxic work environment, where I jumped into a workplace that had co-workers thriving off of gossip and negativity. Now, I'm always sure to ask things like, what is the work environment like here? On a regular basis, or what are some of your favorite things about this workplace and its people? So, you come here often? This thread, like any thread about interviews, resumes etc. simply reveal that there is no universal ideal and each hiring manager is going to be different. Once I asked if I were not to be chosen for this position, what would be some things I could work on to better fit? They were stumped and actually told me nothing. That I was perfect for the job. I got it. But they also said that was one of the best questions they'd been asked. What will you expect me to have accomplished in 3 months? 6 months? What professional development, continuing ed, industry training or conference or networking opportunities will I have? What would an average day here look like, considering my listed skills? How well do you think I'd fit here? Is your wife single? What's the turnover rate for this position? What is the reason people leave this job? If they panic at this question or fumble it, that's a bad sign. Good answers include, they get promoted, or this is an entry-level position and they moved on after getting experience, went sideways to another depth, etc. HR professional here always. Always ask if there are any concerns about your resume or qualifications. It will open up conversation they will likely be too polite to mention, and give you the chance to change minds on something they may have written you off for without asking. If I asked you to hire me, would your answer be the same as the answer to this question? Checkmate. What's kept you with this company throughout the years? Best piece of advice I was ever given was at the end of the interview to ask, based on what you've heard from me, what do you feel would challenge me in this role? This gives you an opportunity to understand what you may have missed covering, or presumptions they've made about you to correct. It eases the stress for me walking out knowing I've been able to make sure they haven't made their minds up based off of presumptions or impressions I may have made while I was nervously rambling through questions. As a CEO, don't expect to be able to ask specific questions. Ask questions as you go that are real curiosities. Know your audience and respond accordingly. In many interviews the top comment questions will be awkward. Just be an inquisitive person. I wish people would ask to see the projects we're working on. Shows interest. And gives them a great idea of what we really do. They never do though. At the end you'll often be asked if you have any questions, and that's a good time to ask, is there any reason you are considering to not hire me? My husband had given me this advice and I was nervous but did it, and I landed a job I for sure wouldn't have if I did not ask this question. She was a bit shocked but not in a bad way, and then she answered me as honestly and bluntly as I asked. She told me that she thought my interview went well but that she had other candidates more qualified, and they really were. It was a factory position for medical devices that required welding, and I have never welded a day in my life. Barely have experience with tools even. She also mentioned appreciating my initiative. We ended the interview well and not, but a couple days later she called me and let me know that I was hired and that she would have all of my training provided so that I could even learn to weld. Are you a cop? You know you've got to tell me if you're a cop, right? I don't think I've seen this mentioned yet, but you should definitely ask about next steps and try to establish a timeline. You don't want to leave the interview and have no idea when you should expect to hear back. How strict is your sexual harassment policy? What is the company's stance on the attractiveness of one Danny DeVito? I'd do a little research on the company and ask a question about it. Show you're interested in the company. Also maybe ask a question like how long the interviewer has been there. If be more subtle about asking about raises and details about advancement. You might come off as more interested in what they can do for you, not what you can do for them. My interviews have all been standardized, so asking about the job isn't really useful and it doesn't give me additional points, so I ask if they would like me to clarify any of my previous answers. Sometimes if I'm not too interested in the job, I ask what made my potential future boss interested in their position. For context, I work in government, so that's why interviews are standard, and yes, I apply for jobs just because I'm curious and I often get interviewed. There are more jobs than PPL to do them in the administration I work for. I've always wanted to pull out a list when it's my turn to ask questions and start asking open-ended questions like, describe a time you had to deal with an unruly employee and what steps did you take to resolve the issue. Edit. Yes, I have a list of questions I really do ask, but they aren't as ridiculous as this example in which they would really have to work to answer. Like I do. Do you know who I am? What does a typical day in my position look like? How strict is your cocaine policy? Do advancements work based on performance? Or are they scheduled at certain points? Are those advancements negotiable based on my performance? What is your policy on after hours chair sniffing? I think some of the more obvious ones that come to mind. Why is the role available? Did someone leave? Is it new? Is it because team company is expanding? What measures success in the role? Are there any KPIs that measure performance? What is the team structure and how does it fit within an organization? What's your reporting line? What does your day-to-day role look like? What do they expect you to achieve within the first month? 6 months? 1 year? Unless it's very obvious and or stated. Ask about working hours and dress code. What do they enjoy about their role working for the company? What do they think you would gain from the role and working for their organization? So, what's your spaghetti policy round here? Do you have any concerns about me as a candidate that I can address right now? Towards the end, ask, what's one thing that I should improve upon? Shows a willingness to better yourself. Take on new things at any time when it feels appropriate. What's a piece of advice you would give yourself if you were in my shoes if interviewed by a man? Compliment his tie or shoes, cufflinks, etc. and ask about them. If interviewed by a woman, earrings, haircut, necklaces, etc. Nothing too permanent or intrusive, but something that shows that you're personable. It okay if I masturbate in here? This obviously depends on when your interview falls during the day. But I always find, do you have any lunch recommendations? Is a good question and can make the panel think about you and the culture rather than just a random applicant. Anything that can give you a sense of the office culture is valuable. As a coder, I usually ask about things like regularity of meetings, whether it's an open office, what code styles are enforced, if any, and OS distribution workstations. The latter is especially important, because if a company is going to scrimp on a tool their employees use every day to make them money, it's probably not somewhere I want to work. What's your turnover rate of FT associates in the past 12 months in the org and in this department? What's the average tenure of associates within the org? How does the company project its growth over the next 18-24 months? What are some of the challenges with the current culture of the organization that you would like to see changed? When was the last time the company harvested an employee's organs? No. What you do is make them ask the questions you want so you can't hit it out the park. If there is a pitcher of water and glass on the table, pour yourself a glass just enough so that it spills over a bit. The interviewer should then say something like, "Are you okay? You seem a bit nervous," then you cock back and swing. "No. I'm alright. I just always give 110%. What do you wish you had known when you were in my position? Have you got pants on?" Not a question, but before you leave, give a final pitch. Make sure to thank them and tell them how much you would really like the opportunity to work there. Go over why you think you would be a good fit and leave the room on a strong note. What is day-to-day like? What traits do you value the most in an employee? Third one should be about the company. I always use all these 3 and the interviewer seemed to like them. What's the difference between someone that's good in that job and someone who's great at that job? Do you have poop knives available? Where the hole's at? One I have not seen mentioned yet, which I always think it's a good idea to ask, is the following. Would you mind talking me through what an average day for someone with this position would look like? It's good for a few reasons. First, and most obviously, it gives you a more anchored idea of what your day will be like beyond the general things the job description says you'll be doing. It's also a subtle way to get some information that it might not be great to come right out and immediately ask for. What time am I expected to clock in and out? When's lunch? It'll also give you a sense of how structured the day is, which is a big deal for many people. Finally, it'll help you understand what the people hiring and theoretically managing you are like as bosses. They can tell you reasonably well what you can expect each day, probably have done it themselves, or at least pay enough attention that they'll give a damn about you as an employee. Can't describe it well at all? Get out of there. There's a lot of talk about minimum wage. How do you feel about maximum wage? How strict is the sexual harassment policy? The person I'm replacing. Why did they leave? I'm not a recruiter, but worked in the recruiting industry for well over a decade, and have been on both sides of the table. There is always disagreement among peers as to what should, or should not, be asked in an interview by either party, interviewer, interviewee. It was eye-opening to watch my co-workers who were recruiters argue over what questions to ask, and which ones to avoid, and what they expected candidates to ask. Same industry, very different opinions. What I took away is that getting a job is at least 50% luck. Makes rejection a lot easier to take, But one thing everyone agrees on, research the company before you set foot in the door. I just had an interview and I asked what are the schedules typically like? What training is given? What is the most common thing someone struggles with when starting? I asked to tour the work area. I asked what's a challenge that the company is going through right now? Mine was in the middle of a merger. Can I have your number, you hot piece of meat? I have a buddy who swears by the question, can you give me one reason you shouldn't hire me right now? He says if you ask it in a confident and slightly cocky manner it works like a charm. Seems risky to me haha. How strict is your sexual harassment policy? And do you press charges? What does success look like for this role? It's good to know what's expected of you. Not a good answer at all. But I literally asked in an interview yesterday at a brewery, is there anything weird about this job that I should know? Both interviewers went up and asked what I meant. IDK what I was thinking, but I don't think I got the job. Toward the end of the interview when asked if I have questions, I usually say something like, yes, I do have some questions, but before I ask, is there anything I can clarify further or anything you'd like me to expand upon? This gives me a chance to engage them in any potential gaps in my answers to their questions. Then I usually ask something like this, if it hadn't already been stated. What does success look like in the first 6 months for me in this role? What major project work is planned in the first year for this position? What are some of the goals I will want to achieve in that time? I usually ask about the timeline of the interview process too, so that I know when to follow up. And I always send a thank you email to anyone involved. The recruiter, hiring managers, etc. Edit. Additional thoughts. Do you eat children? Is this a 3 strikes and you're out kind of place? What does the career growth look like here? Why are you hiring? If previous person left for whatever reason. Think about the situation. If this is a new position or expanding, that's a good thing. What are the next steps like? Why has this position become available? What do you love most about working here? Ask for the business culture and the hierarchy structure. What is the one thing you wish someone had told you before you started working for this company? Ask questions to clarify their questions. Make things a dialogue. And I love when interviewing that I get a great question in response. Shows me it's someone who's curious and wants to understand things more. What is something that makes you guys unique, stand out, known for? Asked this at my interview in a teaching position and I got the feeling that had never been asked. BC they were kinda stumped in a pleasant way. Also, what are some traits of someone who is successful in this position? I always ask what is your favorite thing about working here? And one thing you may not like so much, it's a diplomatic way to get pros and cons of a company. I'm a recruiter. Before you even start the interview, figure out who you are talking to and then figure out what type of conversation they expect. Do a search and see if you're talking to a recruiter or someone who is on the team. I interview engineers all the time and I don't know a lot of the technical terms. I basically just make sure they have the basic qualification and have a salary within the range. Then send them to the next stage. Save your stories for someone who can appreciate it. Your first point of contact may be looking for basics, and by giving them a 10-minute answer to a question when they were looking for a 30-second answer may make it so the recruiter misses the important information. Always. What do you love about this company? What can I do in my first 30, 60, 90 days that will most help you and your team? How will you measure my success in this role? What skills are most valuable to be successful in this position? Was this role previously filled or is it new? What did the last person and the role do well? What did they do badly? What do you want to start doing or stop doing, and how can I help you do that? Never. What time do we get out leave? What benefits do you offer? How many vacation days do I get? Is there free food? Edit. Never is too strong of a word here. When appropriate would be better. You are interviewing them as well. By asking these questions, you can pretty much make out the office dynamic and what challenges are there. If the hiring manager's answers are off-putting and the team seems tough to work with, the benefits won't matter. Ask where the restroom is before leaving. Is it clean, dirty? Something you can tolerate? Bathrooms speak volumes. Thanks for watching, mate. Make sure to smash that star button for more high quality content.